When something like that happens in life, so shocking, the scan went on for like 3 minutes and we knew that the news wasn't going to be good. The world just opens up underneath you. Anything becomes possible at that point.
The fact that nothing's wrong and that something can strike out of the blue leaves me in this position where I don't need anything to be going wrong. It's almost the fact that everything seems well is a sign that something could go wrong. The sort of stretch on your stomach muscles, the sort of inflammation that women can experience, water retention, diabetes. I think it's perfectly reasonable to come out at the end of that. Actually, no. If you're having a baby and you want to just be going out to the pub all the time, it's going to be hard. It's going to cause some arguments.
And we're rolling. Welcome to the Parenting Truth podcast. Today I'm joined by Ted Bradshaw. Thanks for joining me, Ted.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I was keen to chat to you today because I think it's really refreshing to see a dad. Obviously, in your case, you're a cognitive behavioural therapist, but it's really cool to see a dad sharing information about mental health. I think quite often people stumble upon content and information either when it's too late or when they're really struggling. In the same way we'd follow a fitness account or an account sharing healthy recipes, I think it's really important to be following accounts like yours just to, if only for awareness and to understand that, help is out there. There are tools and techniques to navigate through those struggles. So, yeah, thank you for sharing the content you share.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's really interesting because that's exactly why I started doing it. When I first learned how to be a therapist, I was annoyed straight away. Like, hold on, why has nobody told me this before? I don't get it. So it's something I've wanted to do for a while. So to hear you kind of explain it exactly in that way, yeah, that's really gratifying, actually. Yeah.
So I guess the first question is, what motivated you to start sharing so openly online?
It genuinely does stem back. So, I was really fortunate. I got into the field that I'm in, so being a therapist sort of really early on, and I felt really grateful for that because I wouldn't be the same. Well, I'd be the same person, but I handle things differently as a parent, as a partner. It's helped me in so many different ways, just learning some of this stuff. And I kind of thought, well, some of it you can take for granted once you've learned it. Before I knew this stuff, I would have handled things differently, would have reacted to things differently. And I wanted to share what I have to take some of the mystery out of it, I suppose, but also to share some of the things that I've found really helpful and that I know other people have found really helpful as I've gone along. Yeah,
to be fair, one of the questions that I was going to ask is how do you find your professional sort of knowledge feed into your parenting? Like, does it do you sort of beat yourself up a little bit more maybe when you lose it with your little ones, or how do you sort of find the balance? Because obviously laying like the foundations for emotional intelligence is super important, and we sort of know that it's important to talk about emotions, but that sort of goes out of the window when our little one is stomping their feet because you've peeled the banana or chopped the banana instead of peeling it.
Oh man, I've got examples from this morning. So I tend to do the school run where I can. So this morning, my middle child and my youngest is 3, so he's literally turned 3 a couple of weeks ago, and seems like on the day he's turned 3, we're seeing all of that stuff. So I think it does both. I think it's only helpful. I think maybe sometimes I can put a little bit of "come on, Ted, you're a therapist" type stuff when I'm anxious about something or when I get frustrated with something. So, for example, this morning my middle was running away from me as she was supposed to be going into her class. And part of me was thinking, this is embarrassing. Some of the people that are around here know what I do. They know what I talk about, some of which is, working with your kids. So I better handle this right, if you like. Yeah. So I felt that pressure. But then that's me putting the pressure on her to behave, if you like. And she's only playing. She's 5. She's a kid. She wants to run around. She wants to have a good time. She doesn't know. It's not fair for me to just wade straight in and sort of shout at her. So I had to kind of manage myself and say, all right, do what you need to do. Talk to her about it a few times, and you sort of scale up the severity in your voice rather than going straight into wading in with a shout type stuff. And that worked well, but I can understand that internal pressure is kind of added to when you feel you're talking about trying to help other people with those things.
Yeah. Do you feel sort of being judged in public on the school run, for example, because people know what you do, and you're like, right, I need to sort of enforce what I talk about day to day.
Yeah, I think I do, which partly is ridiculous because not everybody knows what I do. Nobody knows who I am yet. I'm not sort of. That's me overinflating the possibility of it, I suppose, in my own head. So I feel it, and I'm aware that might happen as I go forward. The sort of TikTok, for example, people actually being seeing what I do is reasonably new for me. Actually, it used to be about 12 people would hear what I had to say, and it was a lot safer that way. So yeah, absolutely, this pressure, which I don't think is anywhere near limited to people that are talking about this stuff. I know I felt this way before I started doing this. I wanted to give a good impression of myself as a dad. I wanted to be laid back. I wanted to be seen to be being useful with my children. But you can't be that way all the time. Sometimes, I snap a bit, or that kind of stuff. So taking a bit of pressure off yourself is helpful a lot of the time.
Obviously, I show up every day online. I try and share the positive side of parenting and encourage parents to be, calm and responsive. But certainly over the years, I try and reflect on the content I share and just make sure there's a balance, because, it's impossible to be calm, present and responsive all of the time. And I know you've got 3 children. Is it 7, 5 and 3?
Spot on. Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. How you can be calm and responsive all of the time, I don't know, so hats off to you.
Well, exactly as you've said, you can't be. You just can't be. It's not possible. And one of the key things I'll say a lot of the time is, one of the key skills I think as a parent is knowing how to apologise, actually. Because we had a really lovely moment with my eldest at one point. She really kicked off at us. And to be fair, my 5-year-old has done this a couple of times at bedtime, where she's really kicked off. And I just remember being really like, oh, okay, we're doing a good job. Because just sort of out of nowhere, she just went, I'm sorry about that, Daddy. And I was like, oh my word, I think you've seen that from us. Because we will say, yeah, you know what, I shouldn't have shouted. Rather than setting the expectation that you're going to be zen all the time. That's not fair to them either. They're not going to be zen all the time. That's not my expectation of you as a child. If I can show you that it's okay to make a mistake, and as long as you own it, that's all right. That's maybe a more realistic expectation, I think.
Yeah, and I think obviously we need to help them with their emotions and things like that. But yeah, there is a balance, and when we do lose it, that just opens up a whole opportunity to show them that we're authentic and we make mistakes, and you can make mistakes and still be okay, I think is important as well. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to communicate through the dad vibes, because there's a lot of accounts out there that don't really talk about that side of things. And I wrote a document, just a short 30-page document called Lose It Less. And that took off really well, because I think that's an important message. We are going to lose it, but what steps can we take to lose it less? And I think what you mentioned there about your 5-year-old, it only wants to play. I think the biggest thing is setting realistic expectations for our little ones is quite important, because it helps us view them a little bit differently. A
lot of the time when you kind of feel yourself getting riled up, sometimes it's, they can be annoying. that can be really useful. It's kind of like, for me, it's when they fight with each other over like nothing, and that's what's going on with my 2 youngest at the minute. It's just constant, really, is what it feels like. And I know that gets me more, because some of my stuff is about being kind, and that you must be kind all the time. Whereas actually, you know what? That's not completely fair either. If somebody takes a toy off you, actually it's fair to be annoyed. Yeah.
We don't do play dates at home that often, and I only realised that recently, but one of Luca's friends came over, and I could see him, working out in his head, there's another child in my space wanting to play with all my toys. And initially you want to say, just share, just do this, he only wants to play. But then you think, right, we've got something that doesn't happen that often. Someone coming into his space, wanting to play with all of his toys. He's got his Lego laid out in a certain way. So yeah, it's just finding that balance that, yes, we want to encourage sharing and our little ones to be kind, but, we wouldn't like it if someone just stormed into our office and started playing and moving everything around. So I wanted to talk to you because, interestingly, my wife has just started, she was referred on the NHS, started cognitive behavioural therapy. So we've got 2 little ones, but my wife has been pregnant 7 times. So we've had 4 first trimester losses, and then in 2021 we had a daughter, baby Noah, that was born when my wife was 5 months pregnant. Perfect pregnancy. Everything was going well. We heard her heartbeat a week before, and then we went into the 5-month scan and obviously heard the dreaded words, there's no heartbeat. So that's been really tough to obviously go through that, and my wife's really struggled. So I realised the two married up, so it's interesting to chat to you today. But so do you work for the NHS, or do you now work privately?
I used to. So I used to work for the NHS. That's where the majority of my career has been. And when I say that sounds absolutely brutal, just unbelievable. And like, how do you get your head around that is the phrase that kind of comes into my head. And for a lot of years, I know lots of people out there have had cognitive behavioural therapy. Good for your wife for going and get some help, by the way. That is not an easy thing to do, to actually even know where to start. It's very hard to talk about it a lot of the time, and you don't necessarily know why it will be helpful or how it will be helpful, I suppose. And that's kind of can be quite fearful, because I'm going to put myself in this position that's really sort of vulnerable and scary, and I don't even know if it's going to work, actually. Interestingly, from my perspective anyway, so what you would typically get in an NHS service, we are very fortunate in this country. We do have self-referral services. You don't have to go through the GP, but people don't know they exist, which is annoying. But what you might be recommended for when it's like kind of loss-based, you might get recommended a counsellor. So somebody who the philosophy of a counselling, person-centred counselling, is purely listening. And actually that can be really valuable for stuff like loss. CBT tends to focus more on understanding, okay, well, what does this mean to you? What is it that's making you kind of feel this way? Obviously, the loss, of course, you're going to be affected by it. But the way in which it affects us is different for everybody, depending on your other previous experiences, depending on kind of who you are, and understanding that. The biggest thing, I think, is hopefully being made to feel sort of normalised. But it's reasonable, actually, to be feeling this way. For me, that's the most important message. And not always something that's focused on in therapy. Sometimes we're too focused on trying to fix the problem rather than first saying, hold on, what if it's reasonable for you to feel this way? It doesn't mean we can't offer something helpful as well. But first and foremost, let's just establish that this is perfectly reasonable, shall we? Actually.
Yeah, I think because Noah was a perfectly healthy pregnancy, and I think when something like that happens in life, so shocking. I mean, we could sort of feel it during the scan. The scan went on for like 3 minutes, and we knew that the news wasn't going to be good. And when the world just opens up underneath you, anything becomes possible at that point. So you can never really relax into anything. So when Noah passed away, we had 2 further miscarriages after Noah, and it was at that point we were like, right, we need to go privately, and we found a really good consultant that came up with a plan of action. And now we've got baby Mia, who was born in December. So with that, like, Mia's pregnancy was also quite traumatic, because we could never settle into the pregnancy. I remember the 5-month scan, every single scan, because we were scanned every week for the entire pregnancy, was quite traumatic. It got a little bit easier towards the end when we were quite heavily monitored, but I remember Laura shaking in the seat in those early scans, because you're just waiting for that news. And then even since she was born, we pretty much locked down over Christmas, because the anxiety set in. We didn't want her to get, it's cold and flu season, so we didn't want her to get poorly, or we didn't want anyone to hold her, so we decided just to lock down, give ourselves that space. But yeah, it's quite tough, and we just find ourselves catastrophizing everything. We find a little bump or a lump, and we go to worst case scenario, or she gets the sniffles, we go to worst case scenario. So we're still working through that. And hopefully this will help Laura maybe rein in some of those anxieties and from escalating, very quickly.
I'd even just hearing it, like when you described, sitting in that room and kind of feeling that it wasn't going to be good news. I can kind of feel that in my chest, like the sort of panic and straight away sort of sadness, actually. And I think you've explained it so well, that example of it almost, the fact that nothing was wrong and that something can strike out of the blue leaves me in this position where I don't need anything to be going wrong. It's almost the fact that everything seems well is a sign that something could go wrong. Does that sort of make sense?
Yes.
And I think this is again another example of how do we help somebody. It's from the outside, when somebody says, okay, I've got a baby, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong right now, there doesn't seem to be any major health issues, but I'm feeling panicky about the safety of my child. It's very easy for somebody completely on the outside of that to go, well, why are you anxious? Like there's nothing to say that. But my phrase for this a lot of the time is, you just don't live in the same world as anybody else. In Laura's world, she knows better. She's literally been shown that it can happen. For somebody else for whom that has never happened, of course they'll be able to go, oh, it'll be all right. But she kind of knows better. And that for me is a really important step. We can often feel that what we're aiming to do in therapy is to be rid of our anxieties or dial them down straight away. But actually you can't really do that unless you first acknowledge that, again, the way that I'm feeling isn't me being strange. It's my brain functioning perfectly well. The most scary thing is something happening to my child, and I have seen that something can happen. So my brain has gone, I don't want that to happen again. Let's be on the lookout for it. That's normal. That's a sign of a healthy brain. It's just a flipping nightmare for you to live with. So how do we recognise that and then find ways of making it less stressful for myself, I suppose.
And I think because we've always been quite cautious with pregnancies, because before Noah we had 2 miscarriages and we were well aware of loss and the risks with a pregnancy. So even during Noah's pregnancy, we were very much like, hopefully when she arrives, we would never commit to her being born. And we had a chat, I think maybe last night, about juggling or battling with the gut feeling and just anxiety. How do you know which one to listen to, or how do you know which one's talking to you? Because we had that with Noah, sort of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We thought something was going to go wrong, everything was going right, it went horribly, quite traumatically wrong. And now, for example, if Mia, who's 14 weeks, has got the sniffles or she gets a temperature, how do we juggle with that escalating into something traumatic's going to happen here, to rationalising, when you think about it logically, it's perfectly normal for a 14-week-old who's got a low immune system to pick up the sniffles quite regularly.
Wow, you see how sort of complicated it is.
I know.
See how kind of grey area that is. But I think you've just done such a lovely description, or your ability to be able to kind of get your head around that idea of, can I even trust my own reactions now? Because am I just over-egging it? But the idea that I might underplay it is so scary, because I can see what has happened. So this is another major part of anxiety a lot of the time, is what I want to do almost is, I'm kind of thinking ahead of, well, if there is something wrong and I didn't do anything about it, I would feel really bad, if you like. So there's that element to it as well. So it's almost safer to do things just in case, because then I'll feel at least I've done something too, if you like. So there can be that element to it. But for me, again, this is that kind of where our focus is at the beginning, is trying to understand what my anxiety is about, can help me be clearer on what are the signs that I am, that it's my experiences are colouring what I've what I'm seeing in front of me. But again, why shouldn't they? And that's totally okay. And the other thing I think is, you said 14 weeks, is that right?
Mia.
Yeah. Mia.
Yes. Yeah. Mia's 14 weeks. Yeah.
So I mean, like, the one thing that I think women can often feel pressurized about is kind of letting go of some of those anxieties really quickly. And actually 14 weeks is still really early days, isn't it? And they look fragile. They look vulnerable. When they get to 3 months or 6 months and they're all like hefty and they just look more robust. And I've just had a bit more time to maybe trust that it's going to be okay. What you can't stop is the gut punch. So you can't stop, baby sneezes and I go, what if it's something serious? I can't stop that completely. It's like a flinch, if you like. But what I can do is recognise it for what it is. Okay, I know what that is. I know where that comes from. Now what am I going to do? Maybe I'll need to talk to my partner about it, get a bit of a second opinion. Let's talk about that together. Okay, all right. Is it okay for me to be overly cautious for a little while, actually, if it doesn't completely take over our whole lives? And maybe that's okay if it gives me the reassurance that I need, as long as I can see myself over the course of months and weeks feeling like I'm starting to, if everything is going okay, starting to treat it as if it is all right gradually, rather than feeling like I have to go from 100 to 0 straight away, actually.
Yeah. And I think even outside of all of the loss, for new parents anyway, I think it's perfectly valid to have all of that anxiety and all of that worry with a new baby, because they are so fragile and everyone wants to sort of invade your space and come and see the baby and hold the baby and poke around. So one thing I try and share on the Dad Vibes is it's perfectly okay for new parents to hold those boundaries with everyone around you. I remember when Luca was born, he was 5 days old before anyone, even our parents, met him, and we managed those expectations from the start. We were like, we want to just enter our own bubble. We don't want any advice or anything like that. We just want to figure things out on our own, because we don't want things complicating the situation. And everyone respected it, although they were probably disappointed and upset. It's our journey and that's what we wanted, and they respected that. So I think that's important.
I think that's a really big thing. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Our third was born just before the first lockdown. Yeah. And when things started to open up, we'd had our reasons for being more anxious about him than we had been around the first two, actually. So we felt, scared that we didn't know how it was going to affect babies, etc. And so again, we had to say to her, I know you've missed us and you want to come and see us and the new baby, but we're not comfortable with that yet. And I know that lots of people found that hard. But yeah, you're exactly right, actually. Part of, I think, being a partner and part of the team as well is kind of being respectful of what your partner wants, even if you're not totally there yet as well. So I don't know if one partner is more anxious about that, rather than you feeling like, well, we need to keep everybody else happy by letting them come and visit, being respectful of, okay, well, I find that hard because I do want my parents to be able to come and see, but if you feel really uncomfortable with it, I'm not going to push you too far. Let's be respectful of that, I suppose. Yeah, it's not an easy balance all the time, is it?
No, and it's quite, I don't think we give enough respect to how challenging a pregnancy is, the birth, postpartum. I remember, I think you shared quite an interesting video that it all gets lumped in with the baby blues, and we just sort of trivialise it a little bit with, women will be a bit emotional after birth. But I think pregnancy can be very challenging for a lot of people. The birth can be very traumatic, and then you've got all of the emotional side of things after birth, figuring out how to be a parent, juggling the expectations of another child if you've got two, recovering physically. Can you talk a little bit about the baby blues and your take on that? Because I thought it was super interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, that's been my latest one that seems to have kind of really struck a chord with a lot of people. I was just annoyed about it that day. I think I've been talking to somebody and I was kind of riled up about it because it's something that's bugged me for a long time. And again, it's another reason I'm very thankful that I do the job that I do, because over the years I've heard stories from women and dads about how hard it's been, or the things that have made it difficult for them, and some of their experiences of having that dismissed as hormonal or as the baby blues. Now, it's not to say that the hormones aren't an important part of it, but I think I was trying to express in the video, let's just look at what's actually happened here, and is it not reasonable to be affected by this? I mean, just the lack of sleep for a start. I know we joke about it as parents, but I think it's particularly brutal for a woman. So my wife, with our first, she woke up kind of with the beginnings of labour at 4 a.m. So, I'd been awake all day. I was shattered when we got home, but I haven't just given birth as well. So the idea that at the end of that day, neither of us slept for 24 hours, but I think she's got it worse because she's also just had the equivalent of major surgery happen to her body, and actually maybe it's hard on me, but can I understand that it might be even more impactful on her, I suppose. So the lack of sleep, the body stuff, I think is kind of underestimated. I've had it kind of hanging around in my head the last couple of days. Sometimes we can want to make, if a woman perhaps shares with us that they're feeling a bit self-conscious about what's different about their body, often what we can lead with as partners is, well, I still think you look great, which is fine and it's positively intentioned. But if we really try and put ourselves in that position, because we kind of hope that makes it better, but actually, if you can really try and understand, well, even if my partner still saw me as attractive, would I be okay if my stomach was sort of a lot saggier than it used to be, if you like, if there was kind of skin that was there that wasn't there before, if for now there are these kind of wrinkles that you kind of get, would I be all right with that? And the answer to that is no, I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't feel comfortable getting that out on the beach straight away. I wouldn't be comfortable wearing really tight t-shirts. It would affect me. And if you can really just try and understand that, that can be helpful too. But there's a lot of stuff out there as well, kind of cultural expectations on women, that they are going to find it really wonderful, that they are going to even this pressure to give birth naturally type thing, this idea that that's what you should be doing. I just don't get it. Like, if it was kidney stones, there's no extra benefit for somebody going, yeah, did you do it naturally? Oh, well done you. Like, they should deserve praise for getting through something, absolutely, but the idea that you have failed somehow if you do what is necessary for your baby and your own sense of comfort and safety, and it's just not in your control. So the sort of judgment as well, and I don't know what you reckon to this, but one of the things that really stood out to me when we had our first in particular was, I've never come across anything like parenting for people thinking they can tell you what they think about it or how to do it.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and especially the older generations, and the term, it happened to me and I turned out fine, or I did this with you and you turned out fine. And I think one of the biggest things for me is parents just need information provided in a non-judgmental way so they can make reasoned decisions that work for them and their family. And I think that's always been my motto. So when I talk about co-sleeping or breastfeeding or anything like that, I try and present it in a way that parents can take it and run with it if it works for them. And I think you're totally right. The judgments, and now more than ever with social media, the way we consume content, one thing at the moment that's hitting me quite hard is I seem to be getting served content around the importance of sleep and how if you get good sleep you're going to win at life, and obviously we can't really get much sleep at the moment. So yeah, the more pressure than ever, so I think parents need more support than ever.
I think you nailed it when you said if you can just put it across in a helpful, non-judgmental way so that people can really understand and make their own decisions, that's a much more helpful thing, where the idea that one can say to a woman or a parenting team, you've got to do it this way, otherwise it's terrible. I think what you said about pregnancy is important there as well, actually, about the impact of pregnancy, because again, my impression, just from working with lots of women in particular, is that lots of women have felt, again, this assumption that they should be enjoying it and that it should be nice and that it should be this kind of glowing time. I always think of Friends, I always think of Friends as like the stereotypical things that you see on TV, like woman is glowing, woman at some point really, really, her libido goes up. They want pickles at 2 a.m. And I'd seen none of these things, absolutely none of these things. And also the sign for labour starting will be that your waters will break on the kitchen floor and everybody will look at you and everybody will know. None of those things seem to be true, but that was my image. So whereas when you think about what some women experience with pregnancy, the sort of stretch on your stomach muscles, the sort of inflammation that women can experience, water retention, diabetes, I think it's perfectly reasonable to come out at the end of that sort of being a bit shaken up, or even for some women it can feel like the end of a marathon. Like it's been so taxing. So particularly if you get that, I can't remember what it's called, but that thing where you're sick all the time. You get to the end of the pregnancy, and actually it's then that you've been kind of holding it together all that time, and it's then that you're really hit with what you've been through, and that can really make you have a period of time, a lull period or a depressive period just after the baby is born, and then you get all the complicated things of I shouldn't be feeling this way, etc. So yeah, to diminish the impact of pregnancy, I think is unhelpful as well. So yeah, I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and it's not even like you have time to rationalise this experience that you've just gone through, because you're thrown into no sleep and trying to keep a human being alive. So it is intense. And even, you know, those newborn days, you see pictures of people like glowing on day 2 or 3, and I try to push myself when our little one, in those first, I think, 8 weeks when they were sleeping and Laura was doing bedtime with Luca, I tried to just do a short, open and honest post about what we were experiencing, because at the time, you know, due to the loss, Luca was 4.5 when Mia was born. We've always co-slept with Luca, so he's been in our bed since the day he was born right up until Mia was born. We've been working from home since he was 2 years old, so we were a very close-knit team, and to have someone come into that, you know, doesn't give you any feedback, they just need you to respond to their needs 24/7, was tough. And, you know, I found that transition far more difficult than the transition to becoming a parent. So I tried to share that as honestly as I could, share our transition from co-sleeping, and it came to the point that Luca just asked if he could go in his own room because he was sick of the crying, and that was day 2 or 3, and that was just a natural progression. And now he's in his room and he's absolutely loving having his own space. So I was quite shocked at how much feedback and how many DMs I got just from sharing that, because a lot of parents, you know, you assume that kids need to go in their room at 1 year old. You assume that everyone's bonded and connected with their new baby, when, you know, it's not always the case. So I just try to unload mentally, and it seems to help people, I think.
Absolutely, the normalising element of it, that's the sort of, you know, therapy term of it. Hearing stories from other people about things they have found hard is just so useful. I've had, it's rare, but on some of my posts I've had the odd kind of comment, you know, shouldn't we be telling women and parents that it's all going to be really good? Why are we scaring people? And actually, I suppose it's unsurprising as a therapist that the argument that we should sweep everything under the rug isn't necessarily something I get on board with. But I do understand what people mean by that. You know, we don't want to scare people off, but that's not what the intention of what we're doing is. It can be, there are wonderful elements to it, and some people can find it all very smooth. But to hear that it's all right to not, or to, even if you're sure about your decision, so, you know, for example, if we're going with co-sleeping, we've been sure about that decision, but actually we're having a little wobble here because we're not sure how we're going to transition out. Even those things are just so helpful to people. Just a bit more honesty, I suppose.
Yeah.
So yeah, I bet that'll be making a massive difference to people.
And I think it provides support to parents in the trenches, like going through, whether it's transitioning from co-sleeping or going through those early weeks. Yeah, and obviously the intention is never to put people off pregnancy or starting a family. I mean, being a dad has been the best thing I've ever done, and I absolutely love it. But it comes with its challenges. So I think, you know, with anything, but ultimately it's all worth it. So that's what matters. Talking about the parenting route, are you able to talk a little bit about your transition into parenting? So maybe rewind a little bit before you became a parent. Where were you in your life when you decided, with you and your partner, right, let's dive in and start a family?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it started with moving in together, actually. So we met when we were 17. So we've been together for a long time. For a long time, I was like, well, you know, I want to get my kind of career up and running, essentially. So we did long distance for quite a long time, and I was up in North Yorkshire. She was down in the Midlands, where we are now. But there came a point where it just sort of struck me, what am I doing? I want to spend more time with this woman. What are you doing? Like, we were getting on fine, but so I moved back down here, got a job down here, and we moved in, and then it all happened very quickly. I think we moved in together 2014, got married 2015, had our first baby in 2016. So it was just a kind of a switch for me. I knew I'd always wanted kids. I knew that from when I was pretty much born. I think as long as I can remember, I knew I was going to have kids at some point. Well, that was my hope. And yeah, so as soon as we got married, we knew that was going to happen. And then we officially started trying on honeymoon. And then when when it came to getting pregnant and going for that first scan, we were way further along than we thought.
Okay.
And we sort of had to think back, and there was a birthday night out for one of my friends, and we were like, oh, okay, yeah, there we go. So that was our first, and we were really fortunate. It all happened as smoothly as it can, and I'm really kind of aware of that as I talk to people that have really difficult experiences, because I know they'll be surrounded by some people like me, I suppose, that it seems like it's all gone so swimmingly, and just very aware of that, actually. But yeah, luckily for me, I'd been working as a therapist for a great many years, so I'd already kind of got my head around the fact that actually my wife's going to need me to really help her in the first few months. And I'm very fortunate that in my line of work, it's mostly women. So actually, I feel like my workplace was much more understanding of what it was going to be like for me as a dad, actually, and the fact that I might need to be available for my wife even during working hours. They were much more ready to understand what that was about. So I found that really helped as well, actually. But interestingly, when you said about bonding, that was one thing that I really noticed with my first, is I knew I was going to be around and I knew I was going to care for her. But I didn't feel, you know how people describe that kind of moment where your baby, again, I think I've got friends in my head where they describe that kind of, you know, your baby holds your finger.
Yeah.
And suddenly this overwhelming kind of feeling of love kind of comes in. And I didn't get that at all. I think it took me until she smiled. And then even then, it got stronger when she laughed.
Yeah.
It got stronger when she laughed. And I remember being a bit uncomfortable, even as a therapist, kind of admitting that to myself, that I didn't feel this thing yet. But to me, I suppose retrospectively, I sort of feel like, well, yeah, you don't know them yet. You don't know them yet. You might feel responsible for them, but to feel the overwhelming love maybe happens when you can see their personality, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we're sort of living that now. So I think those first 12 weeks with a new baby is so intense. You know, you just need to go through the motions and respond to every need 24/7. And then very recently she started tracking, she started smiling. And the feeling I've got towards her has just completely evolved, because you're starting to see that personality slowly come through. So I think the expectation that a dad will hold their new baby and you'll become overwhelmed with emotion and that immediate bond and connection is there is definitely an unrealistic expectation. Hopefully it happens for some people, but a baby doesn't really give you much back in terms of feedback in those first 12 weeks. It's very much just going through the motions. So yeah, thanks for being open and honest about that.
Yeah, thank you too, because it's not easy, is it? And the other thing that I think makes an impact, as you were saying that, is certainly when she was first born, when she literally came out, she was born in, a water bath thing, and I saw her. This is going to sound strange, but they look like aliens. So, when they're first born, it's not what I had in my head of what a baby would look like. I think I had that 3-6 months chunk, sort of, as my dad would call a flesh mountain sort of thing. And, there was this sort of scrawny looking little ET thing. So I think that was a kind of like a shock for me, but also my attention wasn't necessarily on her. It was on my wife, because I'd never seen my wife be in this position before, and she was okay, but I didn't know that, and I didn't know how it was going to be. So I think there's an element of that as well, about your attention isn't necessarily directly straight to the child, actually. And why would it be? You spent at least 9 months focusing on your wife. Hopefully you were focusing on her before then, but there's that element of it too. I think that can make a difference.
And how did you find the transition into parenting life? Because one of the most popular DMs I get are either from dads asking for tips about bonding with a baby, or from mothers asking for tips on how to encourage their partner to be more involved. And I think when we had Luca, so we were 30 years old when we had Luca, we'd been together for a long time. We'd been married 2 years, so we'd done a lot of holidays and things. I've never really had a big social life or a huge network of friends, so it was just me and Laura basically. We did everything together, so I was ready to dive in. And the dads I see struggle with the transition are the ones that maybe have got the busy social life and the lots of activities going on, and there's a lot more to transition from when they transition to becoming a parent. I don't know how easy that was for you.
That's really interesting what you've said there, because I think you're absolutely right, and I see that too. And I would say I was probably more similar to you. So again, the fact that we've been together for so long, in a way, almost the things that we'd like to do together, we've done, if you like. So we've got to go on some big holidays together. In the run up to knowing that we were going to have a child, we went to Vietnam. Like we never went traveling or anything, the two of us. So we'd felt like we'd got to have that, knowing that we probably weren't going to do that when we'd had kids. Turns out we were right. So there was that element of it. But yeah, the social life thing, again, for mums being kind of confused about what their partner is doing and why they're not kind of getting on board, and for the dads kind of struggling to get their head around that transition. If you go in hoping that your life isn't going to change at all with that expectation, I don't think there's any way around it. That's going to be an issue. That is going to be an issue.
Yeah.
You know, even stuff like just when we had our first, I was doing football on a Wednesday night, and I don't do that anymore, but it was good for me. But there was a few weeks where I couldn't go, and then after that it was, okay, you can go football I can get away with football on a Wednesday night because it's important to me and it's an hour and we can kind of deal with that. But actually, it's reasonable for my wife to say, hold on, are you going to leave me with the baby for a whole weekend? Or what, you get to go out to the pub, but sort of I don't. And I know that a lot of the time I hear from men kind of struggling with the idea, but I would be willing to look after the baby for you. But it's actually quite a difficult position if the mum either doesn't want to, or that's not how she relaxes, that's not how she unwinds. So I don't feel I can trade off. I don't feel I can trade here, and that leaves them in a position where they kind of feel resentful. So I suppose the main thing I'm having a bit of a tough time. I'm trying to be nice here, right? I can catch myself trying to be nice about this, but actually no. If you're having a baby and you want to just be going out to the pub all the time, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. It's going to cause some arguments. Be understanding of the fact that your wife's carrying the can for the baby most of the time. And actually, yeah, that doesn't mean that you can't negotiate between the two of you having time out, because it's important. But if you want to carry on exactly as things were, you're going to be in for a bit of a shock, and it's only going to cause you difficulty. So trying to get your head around that. I don't know what you think about this, but straight away, as I said that, what some of the reasons that can be hard for blokes, I actually find it quite hard that some of my mates didn't necessarily know what it was like. So I was the first out of my bunch of mates to have a baby, and actually I don't think they totally understood why it was such a big deal, and why none of them were judgmental about it. But you know, if they were going to go to the pub, I felt like, why can't I go? And I felt bad having to say I can't go because I felt like I was being lame or something. And that's only an internal thing for me. But I think that's a part of the transition too. Being able to stand up and say, as a man, no, I'm doing the best thing for my family. I'm sorry, guys, I can't come to the pub. I'm looking forward to seeing you another time, actually. And that's not always easy, I don't think.
No. And I guess everyone has got a different dynamic as well, like a different setup. You know, I know some couples where the dad does have an active life and the mum is okay with that. I know couples where both parents are all in. But so I guess the biggest thing is when it becomes a problem. So obviously the biggest tip would be just to communicate with each other and ensure that both you're managing both sets of expectations and no one is sort of, you know, just doing what they want and annoying the other, basically.
I think it's the assumption, isn't it? Thank you. I think you've articulated that better than I could have done, which is interesting because I literally did a video this morning about how do you kind of be more of a partner with your... Because exactly, every couple is going to be different. If you go in with the assumption that it's your partner's issue, if they find it hard when you go out all the time, that can cause a lot of a clash. But if you can be respectful of one another and kind of negotiate together, all of that makes such a massive difference. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I wanted to close out with 3 questions, if that's okay. These are questions, just quick-fire questions that I'm asking every guest to close out each episode. So the first one is, knowing what you know now with 3 kids, what advice would you give your pre-parenting self?
The main thing is some of the things they will do in their own time. So with our eldest, for example, potty training took ages because she had all sorts of like difficulty even from a baby with her stomach. So, and we tried everything. We tried bribery, sort of sticker charts, and actually one day she just did it. She just did it. I was like, okay, right. Maybe we just need to take the pressure off. You can't do everything, force everything. Actually, some things they've got to come to in their own time.
Yeah, and also if you think back to that period of time, I'm sure it put a lot of stress on you and your partner, and by thinking that way, it just relieves a lot of that stress, doesn't it? So it makes
and
for a
the
much
phrase
more...
I always say to new parents is everything's a phase. It might be a really long phase, but there is an end. There is always an end. If they're not sleeping, it's a phase. It will end one day. If the potty training is a thing, it will get there one day. It just might be really long. But if you know it's a phase, it's not going to be forever.
Yeah,
it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, I think that's important. I talk a lot about emotional regulation and teaching our little ones to sort of little tools and tips to help them manage their emotions, because one of the biggest things is when they start feeling those emotions and don't have the language or the development to express and communicate them, so they start hitting, biting and scratching, which can be quite worrying and challenging when a parent sees that and they think they've done something wrong. But it's not nice, and obviously you need to try and create a safe space, and it is normal, and it is just a phase that a lot of parents have to go through. So yeah, it is just a phase is important. So question 2, what's the one thing you feel you need to work on as a parent?
Oof. All right, narrow it down to one. I think I think being present, I find that quite hard. So, and again,
Okay.
I know there'll be lots of parents out there that kind of identify with this. So I work at home. So in a way, it's easier when you work out, because you get when you work out of the home, because you get a commute to transition from work to home. But at home, I walk out that door that's behind me here, and that's my house. So I'm expected to sort of switch straight away, and I find that quite hard. And even at the weekend, sometimes my mind is still on things I need to do around the house, or work that's kind of hanging over my head, if you like. And I'm a better parent, a better dad, or a more present, maybe not better, but more present. I find it more easier to be present if I do something physical with them. So okay. I'm a better dad when I'm outside. But in the house, I know that I'm better if they're playing Lego. It's hard for me to just watch them. I'll be better if I get down on the floor and I get my hands in it and I work with them, actually. Using those kind of sensory things to help me be more in the room is something that I could work on.
Yeah, I can relate to that. So I work from home as well, and when you leave the office, I've still got all of the apps to communicate with my team, Slack and email on my phone. So I could leave the office and just be in the kitchen, checking Slack and chatting to the team. So yeah, having that disconnect, and like you say, doing something like getting outside obviously removes a lot of the distractions, and you have to be present, don't you, when you're out and about doing something. So that's an important one. And finally, what's the best thing about being a parent?
No, that's hard to narrow down to one, isn't it, actually? That's the toughest one. Recently, this is a new development, I think, is just seeing what they're into. So the older they get, my dad always used to say to me, kids only get more interesting, actually. And I can kind of see that. It's lovely in the early days in lots of different ways, but my oldest in particular, she can read now, so now she's into Harry Potter and she really likes it. When we take her into a bookshop, she can choose, or a library, she can choose something that she's interested in. And I just love that. Being able to see how different she is to me, some of the things that she's, like why she's interested in particular things, just seeing that emerge and seeing their little personalities is, I don't even have a word for what that is, but it's brilliant, and I love it.
Yeah, we're starting to see that now with Luca, who's 5 this month, and I think from about 3 to 4, it's you sort of go with the flow, and you maybe give them a little touch of everything to sort of see what tickles their fancy, see what they get into. But when they start pushing 5 and they actually make decisions, I'd love to go to taekwondo, I'd love to do karate, I want to play football, or it is a game changer, because you do start seeing the person they're becoming when they become that age. So yeah, that's an important one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you for joining me today, Ted. It's been a super helpful chat, and if you're keen, I'd love to have you back on in a couple of months maybe for another chat. I feel like I haven't even got through half of my notes. There's so many things I wanted to talk about, so if you're up for it, we'll get you back on for another episode, definitely.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'd love it. Absolutely. You might have got the impression I like talking about this stuff. So
yes, me too.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you for your time, Ted, and we'll chat soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.